When you go to the theater to see, like, a massive stage production, your eyes are naturally drawn right to the spotlight.
Right, you're looking at the costumes, the actors, all that.
Exactly. You hear the booming dialogue, you feel the emotion of the scene. But what you don't see are the pulleys or the counterweights, the stage hands dressed entirely in black, just pulling ropes in the dark.
Because you're meant to feel the magic, not see the actual mechanics.
Yes, exactly. But today, for a deep dive, we're taking you backstage. We are cutting through all the noise and the endless news cycles to show you the invisible plumbing, the actual mechanics of how this magic trick is pulled off in the real world.
We're looking directly at the hidden architecture of influence. I mean, the actual machinery that manufactures the political and cultural reality you interact with every single day.
We're diving into how money, culture, and data all combine to shape what you see on the news and what pops up in your social feeds. And to do this, we are pulling from a really eclectic stack of sources.
Yeah, eclectic is definitely the word.
Right. We've got dense IRS Form 990 tax filings, political opposition research wikis, a highly technical academic paper on cryptocurrency forensics, and, of all things, pop culture music journalism.
And our mission today is to decode how these modern movements operate just underneath the surface.
Yeah.
Like, how do different factions physically track their opponents? How do they move and hide their money using these crazy tax loopholes? And ultimately, how do they try to capture youth culture to execute their goals?
But before we pull back the curtain, we really need to issue a critical disclaimer here. We have to be very, very clear with you, the listener.
Yes, absolutely.
The sources we are diving into today contain highly polarized political content. They detail the inner workings of both left-wing and right-wing organizations, and we are not taking any sides here.
Not at all. We are not endorsing any viewpoints or candidates or ideologies that come up in these documents. We are acting purely as impartial guides.
Right. Our only goal is to report the factual mechanics, the financial data, and the operational strategies from the original source material. We are just examining the machine. We're not cheering for what it produces.
Exactly. So let's start with the overt side of the machine, like the public-facing sword.
Okay, let's do it.
Our sources point us to an organization called American Bridge 21st Century. This is a liberal super PAC and an opposition research group founded by David Brock. And they do not hide what they do.
No, they operate very much as the offensive line.
Right. They essentially function as this massive opposition research hub for the Democratic Party, and they do it through a highly structured physical and digital surveillance network.
Yeah, and the scale is wild. The sources say in the early 2010s, they were employing over 50, quote, unhatty, unquote, trackers.
Yeah, trackers. These are individuals equipped with, high-tech recording gear, and their entire job is to physically shadow Republican candidates and officials across the country.
They just follow.
They show up at diners, town halls, county fairs, literally everywhere.
Okay, wait, let's unpack this. So they are basically a mix of, like, political paparazzi combined with forensic accountants.
That's a great way to put it. Their mandate is to record every single handshake, every utterance. They're looking for an unguarded moment, a gaffe or a flip-flop.
And then what do they do with all that video?
They take all that raw behavioral data and compile massive dossiers. I mean, they built a 2,500-page opposition file on Mitt Romney, for example.
2,500 pages. Wow.
Or they deploy researchers to just dig through archives. That's actually how they discovered that a Trump Institute book had plagiarized 20 pages from a 1995 magazine article.
Jeez.
They gather the raw intelligence, and then they weaponize it through massive financial expenditures.
And, okay, the spending is staggering. Our sources detail a $140 million ad campaign aimed specifically at working-class women in the swing states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
It's a huge ad buy.
And it was explicitly using testimonials to attack Donald Trump. They also launched a separate $25 million ad blitz focused entirely on abortion policy. And looking ahead, they've set up this new initiative called MAGA Files to basically continuously scrutinize the incoming administration.
Right, there's been $100 million in 2024 alone.
But I have to push back on the strategy here just a little bit. If American Bridge is spending $100 million and, as a super PAC, they have to disclose all their donors to the FEC.
Right, they do.
Aren't they at a massive disadvantage compared to a dark money group? Like, why even operate overtly in the sunlight if the other side is just hiding all their money?
Well, you operate overtly because it provides a completely different type of tactical advantage.
Yeah, so?
By functioning publicly as a super PAC, American Bridge can act as a trusted, verified clearinghouse for the entire party ecosystem. Think about it.
Uh-huh.
If a dark money group drops a mysterious oppo file on a candidate, journalists might hesitate to run it.
Because they don't know who paid for the research.
Exactly. But when American Bridge drops a dossier, the press knows exactly who is behind it. Which, ironically, makes the information much easier to launder into the mainstream news cycles.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
Yeah, they basically trade donor anonymity for institutional credibility and, raw, rapid deployment power.
Okay, so if the overt public-facing weapon relies on these high-visibility trackers and $100 million ad buys, what does the defensive, covert machinery look like on the right?
Now we get into the shield.
Right, because if someone is throwing that much opposition research at you, you need a way to absorb the blow and counterattack without leaving a paper trail.
And this takes us completely out of the physical world of trackers and into the financial labyrinth of the tax code.
The dreaded tax code.
If American Bridge is the sword, these complex nonprofit networks are the shield. To understand how they counterattack anonymously, you have to understand the shell game of IRS designations.
Right, the 501c stuff.
Exactly. You have 501c3s, which are traditional charities. Donations to these are tax deductible, but they are strictly forbidden from intervening in political campaigns.
Makes sense.
Then you have 501c4s, which are technically social welfare organizations. Now, they can engage in politics, but only as long as it's not their primary activity.
And primary activity usually means keeping political spending under 50%, right?
Yes. And crucially, 501c4s do not have to disclose their donors at all. And then finally, you have the super PACs, which can spend unlimited amounts on politics, but they must disclose exactly where every dollar came from.
Okay, and here's where it gets really interesting. Because the source material gives us this stunning look at how these three designations are stacked together like a financial matryoshka doll.
It really is.
Let's look at an organization called America First Works, or AFW. Our sources classify this as the hub of a conservative network, and it's a 501c4.
The social welfare group.
Right. So in 2020, AFW pulled in over $51.2 million in revenue. But then in 2021, they reported a total revenue of exactly $33.
Wait, $33?
Not $33 million, $33. How does an organization go from $50 million to the cost of a few pizzas in 12 months?
Well, it drops to zero because it is not designed to hold money. It's designed to wash it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, AFW acts as a massive pass-through entity. They take in tens of millions from undisclosed high net worth individuals or corporations. Now, if they kept that money and spent it all on political ads, they would violate that 50% rule for social welfare groups we just talked about.
Because politics would become their primary activity.
Exactly. So what do? They immediately funnel it out as grants. In 2020, they funneled $20.3 million to a super PAC called America First Action.
I see.
The super PAC then buys all the television ads, and when the FEC forces that super PAC to list its donor, the paperwork simply says that the money came from America First Works.
That is wild. The original human donor is completely cloaked.
Yep. It's an institutional firewall.
And our sources show they also sent $4.795 million to a group called Donors Trust. And Donors Trust is explicitly described in the documentation as a dark money vault.
A vault.
Yeah, it's just a conduit meant to further obscure the origins of the cash.
And what's really fascinating here is that this entire ecosystem is actually a pass-through economy. The nonprofits sitting at the center of the web, they rarely do the actual grassroots work themselves.
They just move the money around.
Right. They take the money, hide the source, and pass it down to an execution layer. And this execution layer relies heavily on niche, for-profit vendors, companies like Menser Media or MW Political. They're the ones who actually buy the airtime, send out the text messages, and organize the rallies.
But, okay, not all of that money makes it to the execution layer. A huge chunk of it stops at the executive level in a way that frankly made my jaw drop.
Yeah, the salaries are pretty revealing.
Let's look at another 501c4 in this specific network. Make America Great Again, Policies, Inc. In their 2021 filing, they reported about $1.38 million in total expenses. Now, you would assume a policy nonprofit is spending that money on, policy research or external grants.
You would hope.
But nearly 36% of that, almost $500,000, went straight to executive compensation.
The IRS filings reveal massive salaries paid to political insiders for roles that seem largely administrative or advisory.
Like who?
Well, Kimberly Guilfoyle was paid $150,000 in 2021. And then that jumped to over $231,000 in 2022 when she became the National Finance Chair.
Wow.
Pam Bondi, the former Florida Attorney General, she was paid $200,000. Richard Grinnell and Matt Whitaker, both former high-ranking government officials, they were also paid $200,000 each.
And what about the actual, program spending?
Their actual program service spending on external grants during that period was virtually zero.
Unbelievable. So you have millions flowing into the dark money hub of AFW, hiding the donors, paying massive salaries to insiders at Mad J Policies, Inc., and filtering down to for-profit media
It's
vendors.
a very lucrative machine.
But all of this financial plumbing, all these tax lawyers and IRS designations, they are utterly useless if they don't eventually move human beings. You have to capture the culture.
Yes.
And specifically, you have to capture the youth, because that's where the raw societal energy really is.
And moving from the financial ledger to the literal streets introduces entirely new vulnerabilities for these groups. Let's look at Turning Point USA, or TPUSA.
Okay.
They operate as a 501c3 charity, serving as this massive youth organizing hub for conservative politics, and their financial footprint is enormous. They reported nearly $85 million in revenue in 2024.
$85 million for a youth group.
Yes, but trying to capture that chaotic youth energy often creates major friction with federal regulators.
And the sources show exactly that. There is a letter from Senator Sheldon Whitehouse sent directly to the IRS commissioner. He was urging the IRS to revoke TPUSA's tax-exempt status.
And what was the catalyst for that?
Well, they hosted this massive, maskless winter gala at Mar-a-Lago in December 2020, which, was right at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Right.
Whitehouse argued that knowingly hosting a super spreader event violated the public policy requirement that charities are legally bound by.
And the friction isn't just about public health mandates either. It crosses into election law.
Oh.
Yeah. A watchdog group called CRUW filed a complaint that resulted in the Federal Election Commission actually fining Turning Point Action, which is a related entity, $18,000.
What did you do?
They failed to disclose nearly $34,000 in contributions from donors who gave over $200. Turning Point had explicitly solicited those donations to influence the 2020 election.
Ah.
And when you cross that line from social welfare into active election influence, federal law mandates donor disclosure, which they just failed to provide.
Wow. And then you have the attempt to completely shift cultural paradigms with BExit.
Yes, BExit.
This was a foundation started by Candace Owens, and the stated goal was urging Black voters to exit the Democratic Party. And they tried to leverage the ultimate cultural icon to fast-track that movement.
Kanye West.
Yep, Kanye West.
That collision with pop culture perfectly illustrates the risks of trying to manufacture a grassroots movement from the top down.
It totally backfired.
According to this article we have from The Fader, rumors started circulating that Kanye West had personally designed the apparel and the logo for the BLXC campaign.
Which would give the movement instant mainstream street credibility, right?
Exactly. But Kanye publicly disavowed the movement on Twitter. He stated, "I've been used to spread messages I don't believe in," and he explicitly denied designing the shirts.
Ouch.
Yeah, the backlash actually forced Candace Owens to issue a very public apology, stating she never meant to imply he designed the merchandise.
But if you look past all the celebrity drama and actually dig into the IRS 990s for BLXit, the reality on the ground is just stark.
What did the numbers say?
In 2021, the BLXit Foundation raised $7.4 million. They spent over $612,000 just on professional fundraising fees alone.
Just on the fundraisers.
Right. And do you know how much they spent on actual grants to communities that year?
How much?
Zero. Absolutely zero.
Wow. I mean, in 2020, they did manage a few tiny grants. Like they gave $8,000 to Dwight's Southern BBQ in Philadelphia.
8,000 out of millions.
Yeah, the vast majority of the millions raised went to overhead, media production, and consultants. And the financial trajectory was entirely unsustainable. By 2023, their filings showed their total assets had been completely depleted to zero.
I really want to pause on this because this is the detail that just blew my mind. The contrast between the executives and the grassroots volunteers is unbelievable.
Yeah, it's pretty glaring.
We just talked about executives at Medja Policies getting $200,000 salaries. But our sources include the internal BLXXC documents given to their grassroots volunteers. Kids actually knocking on doors and setting up folding tables in the heat.
The actual boots on the ground.
The rules they have to follow are incredibly strict. Volunteers have to front their own money for travel. They are explicitly told that screenshots of bank holds will not be accepted for reimbursement. They need fully cleared receipts. And they are forced to undergo mandatory code of conduct training.
And If I remember correctly, if they use their personal vehicles to drive to events, the internal manual states they are reimbursed at a rate of 14 cents a mile.
14 cents a mile. While the executives running the broader network are pulling six-figure salaries,
It's quite the dynamic.
the people at the top are insulated by millions in dark money, while the kids on the ground have to fight for 14 cents a mile and prove their bank holds just to break even.
And this raises a really important question about the fundamental business model of modern political influence. Are these organizations primarily designed to win elections and enact policy?
Right.
Or, when you look at the heavy executive compensation and the massive fundraising overhead, are they really just designed to sustain the ecosystem that pays the insiders? The grassroots volunteers are fed ideological purpose, which is free, while the financial capital is retained at the top.
But what happens when these movements push the envelope too far? When traditional cultural institutions like pop stars disavow them, and traditional financial institutions start closing their accounts. Where do they go?
Well, they attempt to build parallel infrastructure. Our sources mention a startup called Glorify.
Right, glorify.
It was pitched as this lifestyle, quote-unquote, anti-woke bank, a place where conservatives could put their money where their values were, completely free from the ESG policies of Wall Street.
Sounded like a big deal at the time.
It was. The founder, Toby Nuggebauer, raised $50 million from massive billionaire backers. We're talking Peter Thiel, Ken Griffin, and Vivek Ramaswamy.
So they had the capital.
They did, but the execution was disastrous.
Yeah.
The company rapidly burned through all $50 million and completely collapsed before it could even establish a real foothold.
So what does this all mean for the movement? I mean, if you can't build your own traditional bank and Wall Street won't take your money, you inevitably end up in the cryptocurrency Wild West.
Exactly. Crypto becomes the fallback.
We see this in the documents from the January 6th Congressional Committee. They actually subpoenaed Nicholas Fuentes and Patrick Casey, who are leaders of the America First or Groyper movement.
Right.
The committee found that both men had received tens of thousands of dollars in Bitcoin from a French computer programmer right before the events of January 6th. And the FBI had to heavily scrutinize whether that crypto directly funded illegal activity.
Which brings a massive technical challenge to law enforcement. Think about it. When money moves from a 501c4 to a super PAC, you can at least follow the IRS filings, even if the original donor is hidden.
There's a paper trail somewhere.
Exactly. But when money disappears into Bitcoin wallets, you are dealing with global, decentralized, pseudonymous networks. Criminals and extremists flock to crypto because they think they are hiding in plain sight. You don't need a social security number to open a wallet. You just need a private key.
But wait, I need to push back on the idea of crypto as a perfect hiding place.
Okay, go ahead.
If the blockchain ledger is completely public and every single transaction is recorded forever, aren't bad actors essentially leaving a permanent, indelible receipt at the scene of the crime?
That is the exact paradox highlighted in our source from MIT and IBM.
Okay, the academic paper.
Yes, we have this highly technical academic paper on anti-money laundering, or AML, in Bitcoin. And you are right that permanent public receipt is a major vulnerability, but only if you have the computational power to actually read it. The researchers call this the crowdsourcing of forensic analysis.
How does that actually work? Because looking at a massive spreadsheet of millions of anonymous wallet addresses just sounds impossible for a human to decode.
Well, it is impossible for a human, which is why they use machine learning.
Yeah.
The researchers analyzed something called the elliptic data set.
The elliptic data set.
Right. It contains over 200,000 nodes, which represent individual Bitcoin transactions, and 234,000 edges.
What's an edge?
Edges represent the directed payment flows between those transactions, like the lines connecting the dots. They applied different algorithms to this massive web to predict which transactions were illicit money laundering.
The paper mentions they used algorithms like random forest, which it says was highly effective, but they also introduced something called graph convolutional networks, or GCN.
Yes, GCNs.
How is a GCN different from traditional AI? Like, how does a computer read a relationship on a digital ledger?
Let's use an analogy to make it simpler. Traditional AI models, like random forest, they look at a transaction in isolation. It's like a police officer looking at a house to determine if it's a criminal hideout.
Okay.
They look at the house itself. Is it run down? Are the windows boarded up? In crypto terms, was the transaction unusually large? Was it made at 3:00 a.m.?
Just looking at the single event.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But GCNs work entirely differently. A GCN looks at the neighborhood.
Oh, the neighborhood.
Yes. It looks at who is visiting the house, where the cars leaving the house go next, and who owns the properties next door. GCNs map the relational information in the graph. They don't just look at the wallet, they look at the entire web of wallets it interacts with, flagging patterns of movement that match known laundering syndicates.
Wow. It's like taking the physical trackers from American Bridge, the guys who follow human politicians around with cameras, but doing it digitally on the blockchain with artificial intelligence.
That is exactly what it is.
You are mapping the exact same invisible plumbing, just in a different dimension.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, whether you are using graph convolutional networks to map Bitcoin flows, or human trackers with cameras to map politicians in Iowa, or investigative journalists to map dark money grants between 501c4s, it is all about the exact same thing.
Which is what?
It is the pursuit of underlying choreography.
Choreography.
Yes. How do you take disparate, chaotic energy and organize it into a directed force? And how do you spot the people doing the organizing? Which brings us to our final and honestly most thematic source.
The pop culture music journalism.
Yep.
We have an article from The Fader about a music video for a song called Storm by Generaten, featuring the Swedish rapper Young Lean. Now, Young Lean has serious cultural clout right now. He actually recently acted alongside Charlie XCX and Anya Taylor-Joy in a film called Sacrifice.
He's definitely having a moment.
But in this specific music video, he plays a brutish bully in an all-boys British boarding school.
Right. And the video begins with pure, undirected, destructive youth energy. It's just chaotic hijinks.
Yeah, total chaos.
The boys are tearing apart public infrastructure. They are starting fight clubs in the hallways. It basically represents the raw societal frustration that these political movements desperately want to tap into.
But then in the second half of the video, the tone completely shifts.
Dramatically.
Over these pianos and strings, Young Lean calls for unity. And the boys in the school, who are now dressed uniformly in suits, suddenly begin performing this highly hypnotic, synchronized dance on the school steps.
It was choreographed by a famous composer named Damien Jallett.
Yeah, it transforms from absolute chaos into this ecstatic, unified rebellion.
And the reason this music video matters to our deep dive is because it is a literal visual performance of everything we've just discussed. It mirrors exactly what American Bridge, TPUSA, BLA, and the Groypers are doing in the real world.
They are trying to be the choreographers.
Exactly. They take chaotic, youthful, societal energy, the anger, the passion, the economic frustration, and they apply a structure to it. They use millions of dollars of dark money, complex AI algorithms, and targeted media to shape that raw emotion into a synchronized dance for a specific directed political outcome.
Wow. Okay, let's bring this all home. We started out looking for the stagehands, pulling the ropes in the dark.
And we found them?
We definitely did. We found the physical trackers of American Bridge stalking candidates with cameras to build massive 2,500-page dossiers.
We navigated the dark money nonprofit labyrinth.
Where 501c4 hubs like America First Works turned $50 million into $33 on paper just to hide their donors and pass the cash to super PACs.
We examined the stark business models of these movements.
Oh, yeah, where executives make six figures while grassroots volunteers are nickel and dimed for gas money at 14 cents a mile. And we rode that wave all the way into the digital underground, where AI models like graph convolutional networks map the neighborhoods of illicit Bitcoin transactions.
We've mapped the architecture of modern influence.
We really have.
And it leaves us with a profound thought to look toward the future.
What's that?
We've spent this entire deep dive looking at how millions of dollars in cutting-edge tech are used to choreograph human behavior and hide the money behind it.
Right.
But as artificial intelligence gets exponentially better at mapping relational data on the blockchain, and as trackers and smartphones record every single political whisper in the physical world, will dark money and covert influence even be possible in 10 years?
Oh, wow.
Or are we rapidly moving toward a future where every single attempt to manipulate the public is immediately and permanently visible on a digital ledger?
Will the stagehands have no choice but to work with the work lights on? It's a fascinating thought. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.